Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to do a summary of Influence by Robert Cialdini Chapter 2, Reciprocation, the Old Give and Take. Without further ado, let's get started. In order to persuade others, you need to understand the rules that govern human interaction. And one such rule is the rule of reciprocation. We feel obliged to repay what others have invested in us, and we are even ready to make sacrifices for those who have made sacrifices for us. This is a very old give and take principle rooted in our biological and social nature. So why do we feel like we need to repay others? It all boils down to survival. Thousands of years ago, humans lived in groups and were dependent on others for their survival. If someone did something for you, it meant that you owed them something in return. And if you didn't repay your debt, the group might turn against you and you wouldn't survive. So this feeling of indebtedness became an important part of human evolution and is still prevalent today. For example, if someone does you a favor, you feel compelled to do something nice for them in return. Even if they don't ask you to do anything, you feel like you owe them and want to pay them back. In fact, sometimes we feel like we need to repay people even before they have done something for us. For example, if someone invites you to a party or gives you a gift, you feel like you need to give them something in return, even though they haven't asked you for anything. Now, you may be thinking that the rule of reciprocity is always a good thing, but that's not true. Sometimes it can lead to negative outcomes. For example, when someone asks you for a favor, you may feel like you need to say yes, even if you don't want to. You may feel pressured to do it because you don't want to appear ungrateful. Similarly, if someone invites you to a party, you may feel like you need to go even if you're not interested in parties. However, understanding the rule of reciprocation can also work to your advantage. By giving people small favors, you can increase the likelihood that they will help you in the future. For example, if you get along with your colleagues, you can ask them for advice or help on a project. By being helpful to others, you build goodwill and create a sense of indebtedness, which can lead to them repaying your kindness. Additionally, by understanding the power of reciprocity, you can avoid being taken advantage of. When someone asks you for a favor, you need to be aware of the pressure you may feel to say yes and make sure it's something you're comfortable with. Reciprocity comes into play in many areas of our lives, from personal relationships to business negotiations. One area where reciprocity is particularly important is in sales. Salespeople often use the rule of reciprocity to close deals. They may offer potential customers a free trial of their product or service in the hopes that the customer will feel obligated to buy it. Similarly, we feel like we need to reciprocate when someone compliments us. If someone says we look nice, we may feel like we need to reciprocate with a compliment of our own. However, sometimes reciprocity can backfire. For example, if someone asks us for a small favor, like getting coffee, and we agree, they may ask us for something bigger later, like helping them move. While we may not feel comfortable with the second request, we may feel like we need to agree because we already said yes to the first request. Now let's discuss some ways to use reciprocity to your advantage. First, provide more than you expect to receive. When you do something nice for someone, they'll be more likely to reciprocate if they feel like they're getting more than they're giving. For example, if you bake cookies for your neighbor, they'll be more likely to reciprocate if you make an extra batch of cookies for them instead of just enough for yourself. Second, ask for small favors first. If you want to ask someone for a big favor, start by asking for a small favor first. Once you've established a pattern of reciprocity, it'll be easier to ask for the bigger favor. For example, if you want to ask your boss for a raise, start by asking for a small raise or a bonus first. Once your boss agrees, it'll be easier to ask for the bigger raise. Third, be aware of the sunk cost fallacy. The sunk cost fallacy is the tendency to continue investing in something simply because you've already invested a lot of time, effort, or money into it. For example, you may have spent hours working on a project, but it's not going anywhere. Instead of cutting your losses and moving on, you may feel compelled to continue working on it because you've already spent so much time on it. However, by understanding the sunk cost fallacy, you can avoid making this mistake. You can decide whether or not the project is worth continuing based on its merits, not on your past investment. Moving on to the next concept, which is commitment and consistency. We are more likely to do things that we've already agreed to do, even if they're not in our best interest. For example, if you promise to run a marathon, you're more likely to do it even if you're not a runner. This is because you've made a commitment and your mind is hardwired to follow through on commitments, even if they're not in your best interest. Commitment and consistency are important in many areas of our lives, from personal relationships to business negotiations. For example, if you want to build a strong relationship with someone, it's important to be consistent in your actions. If you're always canceling plans or breaking promises, your friends won't be able to trust you. Similarly, in business negotiations, it's important to be consistent in your message. If you're constantly changing your demands or making false threats, other parties won't take you seriously. Now let's discuss how to use commitment and consistency to your advantage. First, get people to make small commitments early on. Small commitments can add up to bigger ones over time. For example, if you want to ask your boss for a raise, start by asking for a small raise or a bonus first. Once you get that, you can ask for a bigger raise later. Second, use the foot in the door technique. The foot in the door technique is a persuasion tactic where you start with a small request and then follow it up with a bigger one. For example, if you want to sell someone a car, start by asking them if they'd be willing to take a test drive. Once they agree, you can start talking about buying the car. Third, use the door in the face technique. The door in the face technique is another persuasion tactic where you start with a large request and then follow it up with a smaller one. For example, if you want to ask your boss for a raise, start by asking for a large raise and then follow it up with a smaller one. All right, folks, that's a wrap on Chapter 2 of Influence by Robert Cialdini. I hope you enjoyed this summary and found it helpful. If you did, please hit that like button and subscribe for more summaries. I've got a lot more to come, including the rest of this amazing book. And hey, if you've got any thoughts, comments, or questions about this chapter, drop them below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in, and happy influencing.